A very good evening to you and a warm welcome to the Globe on SABC News, coming to you from Johannesburg. I'm Simpio Ngong.
Indeed, a very good evening to you and thank you for joining us. I'm Lulu Gabu. On to our top story.
Algerian President Abdelaziz Bouteflika has resigned. That's according to state TV.
The ailing 82-year-old Bouteflika has been clinging to power despite weeks of protests that first erupted in February when he said we would seek a fifth term in power.
Well, on Monday, his office said the president, who has rarely been seen in public since a 2013 stroke, will resign before the 28th of April. That's the date marking the end of his current mandate. The announcement came after a succession of loyalists deserted him in the face of the massive protests rocking Algeria.
For more on the story, we are joined on the line by Afro-Middle East Centre researcher Ebrahim Deen. Ebrahim, good evening and thank you so much for joining us on the Globe. Looking at the latest developments, finally Algeria's President Abdelaziz Bouteflika has resigned according to state media. Can these allegations be confirmed?
It does seem as if he has resigned. It was only a matter of time. But we await to see what will happen next, mainly because he wasn't necessarily in charge for the past 5 years. As the report, the link says, he was last seen 6 years ago. So the people pulling the strings behind him are still there.
Now, Algeria's army seems to be demanding immediate launch of impeachment process against Abdelaziz Bouteflika. Is this necessary after he resigned?
I think, it shouldn't be necessary now that he's resigned. But what the military is playing for is the fact that if they have a resignation by impeachment, they can choose, or the success, or the person leading the transition will be the head of the Senate. Whereas the current process or the current resignation of Bouteflika actually seems to allow many of his backers to still continue in the process of transition and to project their interests. So, it's a battle behind the scenes which has come to the public, at least in part, for who controls the country's politics going forward.
Now, following weeks of protests against President Bouteflika, will the resignation of the president bring normalcy back in the country?
For now, I do not think so. The protesters, they started off by opposing Bouteflika's fifth term. And the protest has intensified to call for the whole system. Algeria is not necessarily ruled by Bouteflika. It's ruled by what many Algerians and many experts term la pouvoir, the power, which is a combination of the army, the intelligence services, and the ruling FLN and National Democratic Rally parties. So, the protesters are now calling for the whole of the system to be changed. And it's unlikely that is going to happen because that will step too much on others' interests, and so we are likely to see continued protests.
Now, in the unlikelihood of the overhauling of the country's political system, as you've just mentioned, the people that are ruling the country presently, what do you think is likely going to take place? The protests might continue, and what happens thereafter? Who is likely to take over? Are there going to be elections? Just take us through the possibilities of Algeria going forward from today.
Okay, so there's three possibilities. One is that there's a clear break with the past. That's the most unlikely scenario. The second scenario is one where we're talking right now, where they're talking about a dialogue conference to chart the way forward, hopefully incorporating some of the opposition figures and coming up with a more consensual, or at least adding more people into the system, into the ruling system. That may be the most likely outcome. Many are touting Ramtani Lamamra, the former foreign minister, as the person who would be able to lead them through this transition and going forward. And the third option is the military becomes too concerned about the protests and takes control directly. That's also unlikely. We are, however, seeing a much more assertive military. Gates Salah, the chief of staff of the military, who himself was appointed by Bouteflika and owes much of his power to Bouteflika, has, increasingly intensified his and more overtly intensified his aspirations to see change and to see change the way he wants change to be seen.
Now, let's just speak about President Bouteflika finally stepping down. What was the reason? Because the 28th of April is just a couple of weeks to go, and now he's finally stepped down, giving the people what they're looking for. Just take us through that and the reaction of Algerians on the ground.
I think the big reason, or the main reason for him stepping down specifically now, is because of the impeachment process. Because he steps down now, he can actually appoint his successor. Rather than if the impeachment process occurs, then the power to appoint the successor is taken away from him and taken away from the FLN and put in the power. It's already automatically legally instituted as the head of the Senate. So the FLN and himself still remain in control of the process. That's the main reason. On the ground, Algerians, the news is quite breaking, so there's not much reaction yet. But, in keeping with what has been happening over the past couple of weeks, it does seem that Algerians are now becoming more concerned with actually seeing more substantial change. Bouteflika wasn't really ruling for the past 6 years. There was other people pulling the strings, and these people still remain. And it does seem, from the past few weeks' protests, that many are calling for a change in these individuals especially. So Bouteflika is just the figurehead. Many are saying that there needs to be proper change and more substantive change.
Now, just in wrapping up, Ebrahim, with Bouteflika just being sort of a poster president and with other people pulling the strings, the military, the intelligence, as you mentioned, what does it mean for Bouteflika in naming his successor going forward? Will that successor still have to report to the people that are behind the scenes?
It does seem so. He would want to, and by appointing successor, he'll actually be in control of the process. There's different strands, so it empowers the FLN and the civilian component of La Pouvoir going forward. So Bouteflika stepping down allows him to do that. And yes, there has to be a compromise, or there will be a compromise between these three different institutions in the country, because they all benefit from the system. But the military seem to want to get back at Bouteflika for removing much of his influence, changing the guard last year. The DRS, Bouteflika has been trying to subsume and contain the DRS in the past 5 years. So these elements are trying to get back in power or get more control, and by resigning, Bouteflika continues to allow the FLN, the civilian component, to exercise influence in the transitional process.
Ebrahim, thank you so much for joining us. We'll leave it there for now. That is Afro-Middle East Centre researcher Ebrahim Deen joining us there with an update on the developments in Algeria.